Okay, so on this video, we're going to be talking about absolute value and how to solve absolute value equations. So let's just get started again with our definition of absolute value. So remember, our absolute value, by definition, is the distance from zero. So when we talk about some distance, we're always going to be talking about a positive value. Okay, so anytime you have absolute value, you're going to have a positive value. So if the question says the absolute value of what number would give you 7, what are all the possible values you could have? Well, think about what can you put in place of x. So in this case, we could say that x could be a positive 7 because we know that a positive 7 absolute value will give us 7. But don't forget, we could also put a negative 7 in there, and its absolute value would also be 7. So when you're solving an equation in which you have the absolute value equal to, and I'm going to write this as a positive number k, okay, then the answer, okay, will always be x equals positive or negative k. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So another example might be if I had or the absolute value of x equals, let's say, 5, then we could just say, well, could be a positive or a negative 5. Okay? So now let's do the next one. When is the absolute value of x, or what number can I take the absolute value of and get a negative 4? Well, again, going back to our definition of absolute value, there is no number that we could put in place of there and get a negative 4 because by definition, the answer will always be positive. So this would be a no solution. And so we could actually define it as if I have the absolute value of x equal to a negative number, okay, x will always be a no solution. Okay, no solution. And it doesn't matter what that value is. Now I'm going to throw in a third one here that this worksheet did not put in. And that's what happens if you have the absolute value of x equal to 0. Now remember, we know that 0 is neither positive nor negative on that. And so in this case, if I have the absolute value of x equals 0, then the only solution I would have would be 0. So we have 3 different criteria we could work with, okay? The first one is if the absolute value of a number equals a positive value, you're going to always end up with what we say is 2 solutions. If the absolute value equals a negative, you're always going to get a no solution. And if the absolute value equals 0, you will only get 1 solution, and that is 0. Now that's going to play a big part into what we do next into solving our absolute values. Okay? And so the steps that we're going to go through is first, you always want to isolate the absolute value. In other words, I want it to be the absolute value equals something. So if the absolute value is multiplied by something, or there's an add and subtract to it, you've got to move everything first until we get the absolute value all by itself. Okay? Once you do this, you're going to need to create your 2 cases. Okay? So in this case, the plus or minus of the number. Okay? Then you're going to solve both equations. And then you always need to check for what's called an extraneous solution. And so an extraneous solution is when we solve it, okay, when we solve the equation and we get a number, but if you try to check it by putting that number in, it doesn't actually work, okay? So what is an extraneous solution? I'm going to say that it is a solution you get when you solve the absolute value when you solve the absolute value equation, but when you check, it does not work. Okay? Sorry. And we'll be doing extraneous solutions for a lot of our equations that we have. So I'm going to run through an example real quick. So here's my first one. And again, I have to decide which one of my situations does it match. Okay? Is it going to match situation 1, situation 2, or situation 3? Okay? And so if, in fact, it is situation 1, which this is, it is equal to a positive number, then this is where I am going to create my two cases. It's already isolated. What I mean by that is all I see on this side is just the absolute value. Okay? So I'm going to create my two cases. My two cases would be that x minus 9 would need to equal 5, or x minus 9 could equal a negative 5. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and solve that. So we're just going to add 9 to both sides. So x equals 14. Now I could do a quick check on this. 14 minus 9, absolute value, does that equal 5? And it does. So I'm going to do the next one. So x equals 4. Again, I'm going to do a quick check. If I take 4 minus 9, do I get 5? Well, this is a negative 5, and the negative 5's absolute value is 5. So both of these check. So again, the key here is, guys, when you do your two situations, you only change this piece. If you'll notice on there that the x minus 9 stayed exactly the same. That piece never changes. It is your answer that changes. Okay, I'm going to do one more real quick, and I just want to show you what we mean by isolating. So we'll go down here and get one that's got multiple steps. So number 11. If you look at this, number 11, here is my absolute value piece of it. Okay, and so sometimes I highlight that so that you see it. And I'll say that that's our function, our absolute value function. And so we need to solve this. Okay, now sometimes, and you might not need it, but sometimes kids need to see this a little simpler, because I'm just going to put an X where that absolute value is at. Okay, and so the question would be, how would you solve that equation? Well, what you would need to do first is move the 9 over. And that would be a negative 24. And now we would do a division by negative 4. Okay? And now, as you see, I now have my absolute value isolated. It's all by itself. And I'm going to set up my two cases. So c plus 10 equals 6, or c plus 10 could equal a negative 6. So it could equal either one of those numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and solve. So c equals a negative 4. And then I'm going to check it. Okay, so do a quick check. So 9 minus 4 times a negative 4 plus 10 equals a negative 15. So 9 minus 4 times, and a negative 4 plus 10 is 6. Okay. And then this would be absolute value of 6 is 6. 6 times negative 4. So 9 minus 24. And the question is, does that equal a negative 15? And it does. So that works. So I'm going to go ahead and solve the next one. And c is a negative 16. So again, I'm going to go do a quick check. So 9 minus 4 times a negative 16 plus 10, that should give me a negative 15. So 9 minus 4 times a negative 6. So again, absolute value of a negative 6 is 6. 6 times 4 is 24. 9 minus 24, that does equal the negative 15. So both of those checked. So that's what it means by isolate the absolute value on that. So you cannot write both equations until you have isolated your variable, isolated your absolute value. And I would do a quick check just to double check to make sure it does work. Typically, most absolute values do work, but there are a few cases where it definitely might not work. Okay, hopefully you have no questions, but if you do, please let me know, and you're going to be working on this worksheet.